Jonathan Berendt, also popularly known as JB. So JB has been a sales guy since beginning. He has been selling a lot of stuff in Oracle. He was doing what $50 million in sales for a business in Oracle. Then he went on to Google again. He was taking care of the clients in the ad world and was selling a lot of stuff. And gradually, he became a guy obsessed with sleep and brain. What happened, JB, Jonathan, that you became from sales to sleep and brain? What was the shift in your brain?
Yeah, well, first of all, when I was 18, I had a dream where a famous quarterback, maybe some people remember Joe Montana, in the dream, he said, "Go west, young man." And so I was looking at schools in Indiana, where I was from, and Penn was actively recruiting me to run track. But Stanford was west, and I ultimately followed that dream out west, and in part because there was a dream researcher there named Stephen LaBerge, and I got to know him when I was 18. He taught me this very fascinating space of lucid dreaming, where you could become conscious in your dreams, and it was a fantastic way to explore consciousness. And so I ended up not studying it academically, but it was always a passion, if you will. I think maybe I was very pragmatic. And so I had heard that if you want to become a leader of your own company, you have to choose a kind of stovepipe to go up. And I'd heard that sales was a good stovepipe because you're ultimately got to be responsible for revenue at some point if you want to lead a company. So I went the sales path. But fortunately at Google, I had the opportunity to pitch kind of a crazy idea. And, honestly, it was that connection with Stephen from when I was 18 to, 20 plus years later that he gave me a paper and he said, "Look, this is really interesting science. Somebody ought to build a product. You ought to see if Google wants to build a product in that space." So I tipped my hat to him. I, pitched this crazy idea, and then, everything changed. It's been a wild journey to really, pivot from sales and product management to really leading a very technical team and very deep in neuroscience here at NextSense.
Wonderful. You were also part of the company called X, which is a company in the Alphabet group, which is solving very hard problems you mentioned. And in one of your papers and talk, Jonathan, I was reading that you can talk to people. You mentioned that you can talk to people who are sleeping and are in their dreams. Mm-hmm. That basically means Leonardo DiCaprio in the movie Inception was not wrong. So tell us more about it. How can you talk to people who are sleeping out in dreams?
Yeah, no, it is kind of crazy. So at X, I started working with a researcher named Ken Paller. He was at Northwestern University, and I was telling him about sort of the background in lucid dreams and that you can really bring a cue of some sort of external cue into a dream. And in fact, there were some devices that were using flashing lights, to get it in. But I told Ken, I think that you can actually get audio in as well. And he said, well, let's try it. So he hooked me up to an EEG and had a grad student scoring my sleep while I was sleeping. And then they said, we want to play some tones. And if you hear those tones, I want you to move your eyes left, right, left, right. That'll be like the signal that you hear the tones. And so, of course, it was a little stressful. And I thought, I don't know if I'm going to be able to fall asleep. Like this was sort of a nap, during the day. And in fact, I was, just lying in the dark room and, losing, a little bit of track of time. But like, I don't think I'm falling asleep. And then I heard the tones. And so I signaled left, right, left, right. And I thought, oh, no, I'm not asleep. And so, about what felt like 20 minutes later, they opened the door and I thought, boy, this is a bust. I couldn't fall asleep. I've been here 20 minutes and I heard some tones, but, and they said, great job. I said, what do you mean? It's like, yeah, you, when you were in REM, we did the tones. I was like, really? And I said, yeah, I was asleep. It's like, yeah, you've been in there an hour and a half. I was like, an hour and a half. So I actually did fall asleep. I was lucid, but it was, the brain actually, they now know goes into sort of local sleep. And so, parts of the brain shut down, and in a lucid dream, parts stay active, especially the part that has sort of self-recognition and self-awareness. And so that was the beginning of it. Then actually many labs ended up replicating. We published in Cell Biology. There was, several different media clips because it is kind of wild. So the actual experiment, it wasn't just tones. They actually did math questions. And so, 2 + 2, 6 - and then you would respond with eye movements. And so there was sort of a prearranged, communication signal, because when you're even in a dream, you have the ability to control your eyes. And so that is one of the ways to communicate. And again, that's what Stephen LaBerge sort of pioneered in the 80s, that's the gold standard for knowing you're actually in a dream, that, sleep scientists can recognize when somebody's asleep, and sleep scientists can agree they're in REM. And so if those two things are true, and then somebody does a deliberate eye movement, you know that they actually were dreaming and they just communicated to you.
Jonathan has built a fabulous ear pod, which goes into your ear and tracks a lot of parameters in your body. Jonathan, nobody else could solve this before you. Why did you leave your cushy job and went to a startup to build a product which is going to change the world? And tell us more about this ear pod as well.
Sure. So when I was at the Moonshot Factory, we were looking at biosensing. I had an intuition that as we think about sort of the future of computing, there would be this intersection of biology, technology, and the humanities. But I wasn't quite sure, how is it going to come together? There's been a lot of traditional focus when you're measuring brain waves on brain-computer interfaces, or BCI. So I looked at that. I went to all those conferences. We thought of sort of some novel ways to interact with the digital world. But in what at the time was anything but a serendipitous moment, I had a revelation. And so that happened when I was in a discussion with a Google executive about, sort of the right to privacy. I think that there's really an important topic that, in my world around cognitive liberty that Nita Farahani has been championing. And I was already kind of in that mindset. And so I was having this, somewhat heated discussion about this right to privacy. And though I didn't use that term, cognitive liberty, that's what I meant. Afterwards, I was debriefing with a partner and I said, I don't feel very good. And he's like, oh, look, it's the first discussion, it's fine. We'll go. And I'm like, no, physically, I don't feel well. And right then my Apple Watch sent me an alert, and I looked at it and it said, unusual heartbeat detected. So I did, a ECG monitoring with this watch, which is a class 2 device. And it said I was in atrial fibrillation. So 4 hours later, I was seeing Dr. Sung Chun, my cardiologist, who I hadn't seen for 15 years. And it's that awkward moment where he's like, good to see you, I think. And I said, is this thing accurate? And he said, unfortunately, it really is. And so he hooked me up, and sure enough, I was in AFib. And a week later, he cardioverted me. And thanks to, that quick intervention and that, rapid cardioversion, I was able to get to stable rhythm, because I had been stable for 15 years. I was diagnosed with atrial fibrillation at a very early age. And when the Apple Watch came out with a class 2 cleared algorithm, I bought 2, so I'm charging one and wearing one. So I'm constantly doing it. And that's when the aha moment was. And so that's when I went to Astro and I said, look, we have something that, could be, in the same way that I have an irregular heartbeat, and this is, a medical device for me, we could make a pair of earbuds. And for people that have irregular brain rhythms, otherwise known as seizures, otherwise known as epilepsy, we could really provide something, meaningful for them. And, it could look like a pair of earbuds. We don't have to have the stigma of being able to have like a medical device. And, I know that was important for me, to do that. And so that was really the beginning of it. And, fortunately, Stephen Levy heard about this, and he covered us in a Wired article last year and told, a little bit of this story. So if people want to hear that in a little bit more detail, they can go. But that really was the genesis, that I think there's this crossover. And then I really brought in all the background research I had done on the future of computing. And I thought, there's a new, kind of class of wearables that are coming, that, they're, biomedical wearables, where, is this a consumer device or a medical device? It depends on who you ask. For me, this is a medical device, right? But for most people, it's a consumer device. And so that's what, we're building. We want to build something that you can do every day, functions with. You could listen to a podcast, or you could, do something like this. There are some really interesting consumer features that you can do around focus and attention and cognitive load, drowsiness. But you can also do some very medical relevant things, such as diagnosing sleep apnea and being able to help people sleep better. And, for those that have epilepsy, not only detect seizures, but, we signed a contract with UCB the leading pharmaceutical in epilepsy drugs, to develop a forecasting algorithm. So, literally putting buds in and then being able to forecast probabilities, of future seizures. So to me, it's just a very, very exciting world. I feel very grateful that, Google has allowed me to take, the work that we did there, because that doesn't happen. That's very rare. And I think that is very cool that Google felt like it couldn't just sort of put this on the shelf inside of the four walls, but allowed me to take it out.
Super, super. How did you convince Google to do that for you?
Well, Astro's a good guy, and I told him the story, of how the watch, was very helpful. I think that was part of it. We created a novel way to spin out. It was sort of a shared risk model. I had to put my badge on the table. I had to leave, and all I had was a letter from Astro, basically saying, JB's a good guy. If he raises money, we'll inject the IP, at a fair valuation. And so then I went to Ascension Ventures, and in the world of startups, a lot of it is relationships, right? And so Astro and Evo were connected to Matt Herman at Body Media, and then Matt Herman was at Ascension, and so Astro made that connection, and so then Matt ultimately put me in touch with who's our lead investor now, John Kelpler of Ascension Ventures, and so there was sort of a circle of trust there. And I think they felt like, okay, well, let's give this a shot. Let's see if we can do something kind of novel, because there's actually a lot of really interesting projects at the Moonshot Factory that don't lend themselves to an alphabet company. And so I think X was proud to find a new way to be able to do that. And others have since, followed in this. It's sort of a lightweight spin out, if you will. And that, works well for Alphabet, and it certainly works well, for founders. And I think it, ultimately encourages, people at the Moonshot Factory to take risks because they see that story. And I recently posted a video on my LinkedIn feed that shows kind of a day in the life. And I made several versions of it. The one that's, on the public website, I thank investors and employees, but I did a special one just for Astro and X, and they liked it. And evidently it's going in their newsletter this month because they're proud of Next Sense.
Absolutely. So, I saw that video, and he was asking questions to his employees, and one of his employees is an ex-Apple, and Jonathan was interviewing her, and he asked her, what was different between Apple and here? She said, in Apple, you have unlimited resources to work on things. So taking that, what is the biggest problem you're facing in a business right now?
When you build a platform, is knowing, where to first start. And so, we have this brain health platform. I've mentioned seizures. I've mentioned sleep. We also acquired a company last year called Nisos. And, if you Google Nisos and postpartum depression, you'll find a peer-reviewed article. If you Google Nisos and rheumatoid arthritis, FDA breakthrough, you'll find an announcement. So this company, unfortunately, was distressed last year, and we took advantage of that opportunity. And so now, we're faced with just, a plethora of options. And, it's almost the tyranny of choice, because we have our own technology that senses, and we now have this technology that stimulates. Now, it was very fortunate that we were able to take advantage of this. And so sometimes they say in the worst economic climates, great companies are born. I think it's because of opportunities like this, right? Talent pools become more available to startups, distressed assets. And so we always wanted to build a read-write platform, for the brain. And now we have all that technology, surprisingly. We have a lot of IP, both in terms of patents, published patents, both in terms of hardware, clinical studies. I mean, the Nisos technology was deployed at 40 different clinical sites. I mean, Rebecca, you can appreciate, that's a lot. That is a lot. And so now we sifted through all that. And, we found, one potential indication that looked really attractive: postpartum depression. And so, one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit and get, maybe some discussion going, and maybe it's a little bit controversial, but, is the FDA really ready to embrace electroceuticals? Is it really ready to embrace, a new frontier of medicine? And I was very inspired by Sally Adie's book, We Are Electric. Highly recommend that. The short version of that is, we've spent all this time on the genome. We need to focus on the electron. Every cell in our body has a voltage. There's a membrane voltage. And researchers have shown by manipulating that voltage, you can do so many things. And so we have this device that can be worn around the neck that can stimulate the inner ear, which gets connected to the vagus nerve. And so we met with the FDA yesterday, and this was after months of prep. And I'll be honest, like, it's not clear that they're going to make this easy for us. And I understand their perspective. But I think the dialogue needs to be greater, because I told them, honestly, at the end of the meeting, I said, I don't know that we can afford to pursue this, given how many barriers you're putting up, even before we get to the pivotal trial. It's going to be hard enough to get investors to gamble on a pivotal trial, spend 10 or $15 million, not know, what the results are going to be. But you're now telling me I need to do a pre-pivotal trial. Like, I thought that's what Breakthrough was about. If you look at postpartum depression and Christina Giordani, you'll see that they already did that. 25 women showed real response on the Hamilton D17 depression score, and they granted Nisos, now NextSense, breakthrough designation in February 2022. Why is that not enough that we can now go to pivotal? And Christina, by the way, is the PI for Sage's new drug that just got approved. So we have a real PI who really understands the space of postpartum depression. We have a device that was really designed well, but yet they're throwing up a barrier that I'm afraid, an investor is not going to say, yeah, let's do a pre-pivotal so we can then go spend $10 million. That's what the whole point of, that was. And it's disappointing, because that's part of what attracted me to buy that company, was like, look, they already have breakthrough for rheumatoid arthritis and postpartum depression. They already have a pivotal study designed. All we got to do is go to the FDA, get a blessing. And then I think, what investor wouldn't, sort of bless a pivotal trial? But this extra barrier just makes me think that maybe the FDA, isn't really, thinking this from our perspective. They're used to pharma spending billions of dollars and being able to jump through all the hoops, hire all the regulatory consultants. But, startups can't do that. And you're limiting innovation if that's the perspective.
So, this is a very similar story that happened with my client as well. My client is called Unicoin. Unicoin is doing Bitcoins in India, is bringing Bitcoins in India. Now, Bitcoins were banned in India, and Unicoin's mission and vision was Bitcoins for billions. That's tagline, Bitcoin for billions, because India has billions of people. After Bitcoins were banned in India, Unicoin founder went to Supreme Court and got Bitcoins allowed in India. And now he is again fulfilling his vision and mission, not bringing Bitcoins to billions. I think this is the true test right now, Jonathan, which I'm sure you will pass. Sure. So Jonathan has about 40, 50 patents on his technology. Jonathan, you have been a great fan of IP. Tell us more about it. How does IP help you?
As I mentioned, we spun out from Google, so we have Google IP. And then soon after that, Heraeus, a medical company in Germany with billions in revenue, they saw that spin out and said, hey, we want to, help you as well. So they spun technology in, and then we bought Nisos. And so, that's, three different portfolio sets that had corporate attorneys writing very well-written patents, and then also lots of published patents. So one of the challenges, though, is really sorting through that. Every week I'm getting an email from our IP firm saying, okay, this one's now an examination. Here's the examiner reviewing these claims. What do you think? And it is challenging because, a lot of those engineers are, no longer at the company. So I find myself, spending my nights and weekends, going deep. And fortunately, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been able to, go very deep in the tech that I have. But it is hard to know how much I should spend, so I think that's a question. How much, should a company like NextSense be spending on IP to maintain, these patents? So again, numbers wise, we have about 8 granted in the US. I think that number is closer to 20 when you go international. And then, we have 30 plus that are just published that, again, every week seems like something is needing a new action on. So it is a little bit hard for me to know how will that ultimately be valued. A lot of them are defensive, honestly. And, for example, very helpful that Apple published their patent on ear EEG. And so I got lots of questions about that. Now, the good news is, we already have some patents there. And I had our patent attorney. I said, "Look, I want you to do an analysis of this patent and see which ones we can cover." And the good news is we actually do cover a lot that was already published. So that's where it's like, okay, well, that's a good thing, because anybody that sees the Apple patent realizes ear EEG. This isn't just a NextSense thing, or there's others. I'll be happy to mention competitors. iDune Technologies, is working on this. Emotive. I say competitors, but really they're partners. We're trying to establish a whole new field, and it's actually a really good thing, that Apple published that. But honestly, there's already a lot of IP in the space. The grandfather of ear EEG is a gentleman named Preben Kidmozet out of our house, and he's been putting on LinkedIn that ear EEG is going up into space, which is amazing. So I think that this is where it's a bit nuanced, right? I think on one hand, you can see I'm really grateful that we have some of these patents, and it allows us to be, sort of protected and perhaps make it a little bit more challenging, for the Apples of the world to enter in this space. But on the flip side, I'm always asking myself, I mean, my IP budget is easily the budget of like, a senior engineer. And so, I could hire a new engineer creating IP, or I could pay these IP attorneys to protect my IP. What should I do? So Prakash, I really liked your wisdom of friction. So I'm gonna pick on you because clearly, you've had a lot of different roles, and I think through different roles you get wisdom. And so I would love to hear your wisdom on this